Good evening again, my students. It's a pleasure coming back to class again. Previously, we have been taking classes in AFS 220. And today is the seventh topic of this series. If you remember very well, we started with the status of fisheries in Nigeria, and we proceed to the morphology of and the basic structure of these fishes. And in topic 3, we're looking at the water quality management in aquaculture. And in topic 4, we brought to your understanding of fish nutrition, feeds, and feeding. And in the 5th lesson, we're looking at the diseases of fishes. If they are not well fed or any other circumstances, the bacteria, the fungal, affect your fish, how to manage it. And the 6th lesson, we're looking at the post-harvest handling of fish. We'll be looking at a principle of wildlife management. I'd like to welcome you to class. My name is Dr. Awolumate Samuel. So you're welcome as we go into the class. Today is the 22nd day of May 2021. So you're welcome. That's my email address in case you want to reach me. The picture of the background just show you the wildlife that is being managed. You see the fence separating the city from the wildlife. And so we'll be looking at the principles that can help you manage your wildlife properly. At the end of this class, we will be, be able to identify the control principles of wildlife management hunting. You will know what are the principles. And secondly, you will be able to the ascribed fire control burning. That is very important. You will also be able to enumerate the environmental variables affecting fire directly or indirectly. And lastly, not the least, but most important, in my opinion, to highlight the elements of a successful collaborative approach to wildlife management. We'll get to know the details as we continue later. So introduction, as a way of introduction, wildlife is simply defined as the application of scientific and technical principle to wildlife population, habitat, contain such population, particularly the mammals, essential for recreation and or scientific purpose. Another way, we can find it, like as you can see, is the science of managing wildlife and its habitats, okay, including man, for the benefit of the entire biota, all the plants and the animal in that environment. And the purpose is just to sustain annual crop of wildlife games, purely for food and recreation. And that's just the purpose. Okay. And secondly, we're transforming the attribute and the interaction of habitats, wild animal population, and man. That interaction between the wildlife and the habitat with the specific purpose of achieving human goal through wildlife resources. So it's pointed out to man, but in doing so, the wildlife itself must be taken care of. The environment, which is the biota itself, must be taken care of. So it benefits all in all the three: the man, the environment, and the biodata, the ecosystem, if you so wish to use that term. So the example of species management, is a bed banding, trapping, and transplanting, land management, wildlife population survey, vegetation survey, wildlife extension work, and implementation and regulation. And that's the last aspect we're going to touch on as we continue in this interactive session of topic 7. Now, you can see at my right hand a picture of, the environment, of course, the wildlife itself, and the man. Of course, the dog being a company, part of, both the wildlife and, what we use in protecting the wildlife itself. So, controlling principle of wildlife management hunting. Number one, we must know that if there is there must be cropping with limitation. We cannot just allow, hunters like you see there, just go into the wild, just kill the animals there, just go ahead hunting indiscriminately. That used to be, a primitive idea. But in the 21st century, there is great effort to ensure that, the cropping of this wildlife is done with limitation. And this is just to avoid decrease in population. Of course, to maintain an optimal population. Of course, you know that there's a pyramid, animal pyramid. And so there is a way the animal in this ecosystem help to balance itself out. So if we allow hunters to just go in there to indiscriminately, crop this wildlife, it can even lead to the extinction of some species. And of course, we know that certain species are already gone into extinction. So we must avoid complete elimination of some species in the world. And there's a need to put a check on hunting of wildlife. There's a need, a great need. If not, man has a way of pushing in the environment and wiping away other mammal, other wildlife. What's the objective of controlling this press? What is the key objective? Look at this man. He said, I am a conservationist, so I kill there to help them. Excuse me. You can't kill it just like that. Without me, they will be in bad shape. Oh, how true is that? How true is that? Well, that's not absolute statement. I would be careful about just going to the wild and killing deer and other species just because you think that you are serving their purpose and not yours. Okay, now the key objective is that we want to restrict the restriction of hunting in protected area lead to increased wildlife. That's true. There's an area that is condemned, that, we must ensure that they are protected and protected so that there will be increase in wildlife. Increase in wildlife. And this will help, help us attain what we call carrying capacity of the ecosystem. Okay, so that is very important for our understanding. So wildlife is important and we must restrict hunting in protected area. We have several protected areas in this country, and I'm sure you can name some of them. Okay, protected area of wildlife. Can you name them? In Nigeria, can you really name them? I'm listening to you. Can you name them? Okay, I leave that to you. You get it across to me in a chat that you will. I will post a question to us later. I will expect you to respond. So it's also ensure that there's a survival of breeding stock of animal species. It prevents the population of animal arising to a point of detrimental to the environment. Maybe that's why this is saying I'm a conservationist. I need to kill some deer, because some particular species can, increase in population at the detriment of others. Hunting may also be allowed, may not be allowed all year round. That is true in protected areas. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Now, there are guidelines to hunting. You see our fellow person there, he cannot just do anything anyhow. There are guidelines for licensed hunters. And what are the guidelines? Number one, the species, the sex, the age of the animal to be hunted must be known. Okay? You must sorry for that interruption. Yeah, this is where we are before the interruption. So we're talking about, the sex, the species, and the age. And the area where hunting could be done, protected area, hunting should not be done in those areas. Okay? Then the time of the day when hunting could be done must be carried out. There are, these are guidelines that a hunter must follow. They can't just go in the night or probably in the day. Generally, night hunting with the use of headman is not allowed, because that's maybe a time some of the species are mating. Okay, so you don't want to go by night with lamp, and this can affect, of course, you can't say, with the headlamp, you can discover the system, there will be pandemonium, they can just go and injure themselves. You threaten them, one of them go in fear and run into a prey. So that we have to, be careful about. Now, the type of weapon allowed is critical as well. What kind of weapon do we allow to be used? Not the one that we catch the prey, any game, indiscriminately. Then the bag limits maximum number of animals that could be killed by an individual hunter. You can't just kill and the entire game. That's not allowed. Then the use of fire is illegal. The use of trap, especially the game trap, is totally prohibited, because it just catch whether it is male, whether it is the age. So all of these criteria, they work together. They are intertwined in their working. So that is very important. Now, we're going to look at the refuge wildlife management. Refuge, okay? This is a protected area where animals could hide against hunting, predation, and disturbance. Of course, like you see on my right hand here, game in this particular place is prohibited. You cannot just go there. So animals run there, and that is for them, a place of refuge, and is being used to sustain and protect endangered species of animal. Also is also used extensively as an immediate protection for transplanted native species and other exotic non-native species. So this particular, area is a refuge. The animal can stay there. They are sure they will not be hunted. A man is not allowed to go into this environment, without being licensed to go and take care of them and all of that. Now, we're talking about wildlife in captivity, and artificial stocking. Now look at this lion that was born in 2017. Okay, they are kept in captivity just to be able to, grow. Okay, it's just like what we talked, a place of refuge. But this one is specifically for artificial stocking, for propagation under control condition, so that by the time they are mature, they can be released into the population. It can either be reintroduced or introduced. If it is non-native, we call it introduction to that environment. But if it is a native animal species, we call it reintroduction after undergoing, propagation. And of course, protection and creation of the refuge is therefore pertinent to the survival of introduced or reintroduced species. So it just backing up what I said to us earlier. Now, we are here looking at the pest wildlife control, vermin control, that's what we call it. Is a control of wildlife damage. Wildlife animals may be responsible for destruction of valuables. Okay, if you look at all of this squirrel, they can destroy your farm, your wood, the forest, the tree, your store products. I'm sure you've known also that bird migration also, has brought down, some plane in times past. So that's why, there is a need to control their population in a particular, ecosystem. So when there is wildlife damage problem, there's a need to carry out an assessment, and we need to ask some pertinent questions. Number one, when was the damage done and carried out? The time period we want to know. We also want to know what was the extent of damage. We really want to know. That is, we're carrying out assessment of that damage so we can take and respond to it accurately. What is the quantity in tons of the item damage? What part of the item, crop or animal products that is damaged? What part of it? What is the cost of establishing what has been damaged, and how much would have been realized if the damage was not occur? So we're looking at the monetary value of what has been destroyed. And so that will help us to respond, to the control, okay? And what is the economic value of the animal species responsible for the damage? So it must be on the balance. If we don't ask this pertinent question, we will not know, what to do next. Okay, now, habitat management. If you see, if you look at this, we can see that the habitat is being, protected. Each of these game have their specific habitat where, they best, when they are occupied, they breed well and they live well. Of course, they have a way of, securing their own environments and staying there. And habitat management is the most critical aspect of wildlife conservation, and that we must know. Habitat loss prevents the greatest threat to the whole wildlife. We cannot afford, to lose certain habitats that is relevant for a specific, wildlife. Okay, and if you could see this particular, this left side, the bottom side, you will see that there's a plot of land, and each of those plots tells us what should be done there per time, so that we can manage the entire, habitats and the entire ecosystem. So habitat improvement is basically concerned with the following objective: to maintain good quality habitat as a natural ecosystem, to produce quality habitat where it has deteriorated. So that means that we must monitor that. If you take an area view of that habitat, you can be able to know, whether it has deteriorated, and where water is lacking, where they need water or shelter. You will know, and you'll be able to carry out, what needs to be done, to move it from from that state where you find, when you have made your assessment, you can manage it appropriately. How to achieve the goal of habitat improvements? How do you achieve that? Production of food and cover for particular species or group of species. Number one, method of propagation. 4 of them: seedling, grafting, cutting, and transplanting. We can propagate. Number 2, process of successful propagation. Okay, because you have to provide a cover and food. So how do you carry out that process? Site selection, after proper survey, site preparation, planting depth, and moisture. All of these are processes of a successful propagation. Then method of releasing of desirable species through destruction of undesirable competing species. Number 1, what we are saying is that there are some species that are undesirable, and we want to be able to remove them from the ecosystem and introduce the desirable species. And how do we do that? Mechanical method, manual method, and chemical spray. And this, however, has to be discouraged considering pollution. It has to be done, as the last resource, because we don't want environmental pollution, chemical pollution. That has been, discouraged to a large extent. Number 4, we must do what we call prescribed burning. We'll talk about it more later. Very often, this method is used in combination with to meet a specific need. And also, we have to protect. That's the protection. This is the protection of the habitat from illegal farming, illegal fire, and erosion. Now, as I told you just now, prescribed fire is very, very good. It helps us to achieve our habitat improvements. So this is what it is. You see this conservationist, monitoring the fire, ensuring that the fire does not go where he doesn't want it to go. Okay, so a control burned area. Intentional use of fire by management staff to influence vegetation. That is prescribed fire. Of course, the fire is a natural occurrence in savanna, but it can be controlled, and we must pay attention to ensure that it is well controlled. Okay, now fire remove old unpalatable growths while promoting the new flock of grasses. I'm sure you must have seen this in places where fire has just burned that environment. You see new shoots, new grasses start springing up in such area. It's also used to control bush and encroachment of range land by woody species, and also help to destroy parasites. So you wonder, okay, how can waters fulfill that objective? Can you see fire as a habitat management tool? It can also be very useful, but it has to be controlled. You see this conservationist here is controlling the fire, and of course you see that the road has been made in between one habitat and the other, such that the fire cannot just move to the other side of the of the ecosystem. You see, it's using fire to burn, all of those grasses here. So it's a natural phenomenon, conscious and inadvertently action. Fire control the parasite of the livestock. Okay, as you burn all of this, you burn it well controlled, it will take away all the parasite that will have, be injurious to the livestock. Now, environmental variables affecting fire directly or indirectly. Number one, talk about 4 of them. The first one, looking at the soil, environmental variable, the soil. The number and the rate of activity of soil organism, that is an environmental factor that can affect, the spread of fire. Okay? The surface compactness. If the surface is well compacted together, it can engineer the fire to spread very fast. Soil water retention property, if there's high level of retention property, we can be sure that the fire will not go, will not spread very fast as it ought to do. Then the amount and the ability of essential nutrients also determine, it's a factor that determine, whether the fire will accomplish its objective, if it is prescribed fire or if it is burning on its own. These are determining factor. Removing and changing rate of organic matter formulation and accumulation of the soil, removing soil surface origin through surface groundwater and sheet erosion. Now, if there's a sheet erosion, it can hinder the fire from fulfilling its objective negatively or positively. Secondly, is the water. Changing rate of transpiration and evaporation. This affects fire. Changing rate of permeability and surface water. This also affects fire. Affecting the amount and the rate of sedimentation. This also affects. Changing streams and river structure. The structure of the river, and through the banks and surrounding vegetation, how the water, course navigate through the forest or the ecosystem determine, whether the fire will spread fast or it will stop its activity. That can be beneficial if it is not if it is not prescribed fire. Now, the third environmental variable is the vegetation itself. The changing direction and the speed of vegetation succession is important. The plant biomass and structure is important. The plant phenology is also very, very important. And the plant quality in terms of nutrient quantity and availability is also very, very important. The animal is another very factor. The animal in that environment, in that ecosystem, the shape and the amount of vegetation cover, the plant palatability and the availability is important, because if it is palatable and very available, the animal will just will have eaten most of them before the fire even comes. So it exposes, the ecosystem, to ravage the remaining plants that is left after the animal has consumed most of it. Indirect altering water availability, because they drink the water if it is depending on the water availability in the ecosystem. And this causes death and injury, especially low order animal. Okay, so the fire can also affect the low order animal. We have 3 major types of fire regime: the ground fire, the surface fire, and the crown fire. The ground fire penetrates the subterranean depths and is common place where the soil is overlaid with thick layer of organic matter and is usually flameless. The surface fire, is just above the ground surface, and this flame usually consumes the litter, living herbs and shrubs. Just the litter is consumed. Of course, it scorches the basis of any tree along its roots. The crown fire, it burns the crown of the tree, the crown, the top of the tree are affected. And of course, the classify as a base of this, we can classify all of this fire on the basis of the year when they occur. If you look at the diagram here, when the oxygen and the heat and the fuel are combined together, we have the fire. The fire regime is determined by the vegetation, the climate, and human activity. The fire regime also it can have adverse effect if unbridled, in our vegetation. It causes destruction of habitat, the removal of food resources, mainly the herbivore, the destruction of young eggs, the young and the eggs, exposure of predators, affect their breeding potential, as well as movements and destruction of the wild in their habitats. These are the adverse effects if the fire is not controlled, like the prescribed fire that we spoke about before. All the habitat can just be wiped away, in a moment of time. Of course, the food will not be available for the herbivores, and the breeding potential of those animals can be affected. What are the beneficial effects of prescribed burning, contrary to the unbridled ones that we spoke about? It can be used to attract animals to certain part of the habitat. Fire has a way of, chasing them out of where they were to where you want them to be. It helps to enhance game and viewing in conservation area. Number 3, it's a useful tool in prevention of wildfire in conservation area, meaning that if you burn out all the edges, deliberately, when the wildfire comes, it cannot reach where you prescribe the protected areas that you don't want the fire to get. So the prescribed fire is very important and beneficial in that regard. Now I'd like to quickly look at this question. Would livestock conservation influence environmental variable affecting fire directly? Can they actually influence it? I like to think about it. And in our chats, you can chat me up or send me an email to respond to this question. Now, let's look at this subject of ranching and domestication. As you can see, this sheep here, or this bull here, or this cow precisely, it's a female one, has been domesticated with all the young one, fenced, okay? So control over the animal population by confining it behind the fence or determining its composition through selective removal of certain age and classes. So we can actually domesticate a particular species, particular class, particular age by ranching and domestication. And domestication just means it's a controlled environment. So we just have to proceed there, ranching and domestication. What's our objective? We want them as pets, we want them as source of food, we want them hunting, and like the picture you see below, the beast of burden to carry, load in primitive time and some areas in this, across the world. It is in Nigeria, particularly in the north, you will see that this cow or probably bull are being used as beast of burden. The choice of these animals for domestication, well, it is based on its ecological potential and the acceptability of that particular animal for meat by the society. An example of such is the giant African rats, the grass cutter, and guinea fowl. So these are examples of animals that have been domesticated, in Nigeria. Continuation of ranching and domestication. What are the conditions for a successful domestication? Number 1, adequate information, is very important. The susceptibility and resistance to diseases, reproduction and growth rate, and the study of the meat production, the carcass quality, and the grazing behavior. Now, all of these 6, must be understood, to help you domesticate this animal very well. That's why the grasshopper and the 3 of them I mentioned, were successful. What are the type of husbandry techniques? 3 of them: the ranching, that is extensive method management system. Then we have the semi-management system, which is the farming in fenced range, and the very, very intensive one, which the governors of our various states, especially southern states, are advocating for, is the intensive management system. We don't want where the game are left, the cow or the cattle are left to roam from north to south and south to north. That is primitive. However, it's subject of debate and controversy in Nigeria at the moment. Okay, now local community participation in wildlife. You can see the local community are being trained, are being, brought to be part of the wildlife conservation. So it is the involvement of all segments of the community in wildlife conservation activity. Community support program geared towards mobilizing local capacity to become social actors in decision-making and observation of activities that are relevant to their livelihood. You see, in times past, people just come and impose, the law that is being made in Ministry of Agriculture, in the wildlife. No, in recent time, we saw that didn't work. In recent time, the local community themselves were now are beginning to be involved to be part of the social actors in the very community where they live and where the animal live. So the involvement of the individual group of individuals who are directly interested in this use and management of these natural resources are very key to a successful wildlife management. We have examples of local community participating in wildlife. Number one is the local community resource user, the developer, the extension worker, industry, indigenous people, and the non-governmental organization. These are people, that can actively participate in wildlife community wildlife management. What is their function? The function of these 6 category of people, just 3 of them, 3 functions that they principally carry out. Number one, they design and implement and evaluate projects. Then, of course, the second one is very important, stewardship of the resources. And once they know that these resources is beneficial to them, and they can see the objective is well explained to them, they will be able to, protect these resources. Of course, in doing so, they're able to monitor and evaluate the resource base. And we can look at the participation level in 2 dimensions. There are passive and there is also active participation. Active participation are people who actually are involved in design, implementation, stewardship, all of the things that we just mentioned. They take, pleasure in doing them, but those who are just passive may not spend their time, actively to ensure that, things are done for the benefit of the ecosystem, the man and the animal itself. Let's look quickly at the elements of a successful collaborative approach to wildlife conservation. Like we said, it involves planning. These are the elements: planning, protected area, the financing, the education and training, as we saw that man in the previous picture that we showed you earlier. We saw here. Can you see this picture here? Yes. This is a training program that will be going on. So in doing so, in training them, they are able to conceptualize the objective and also respond accurately, to a sustained development of the ecosystem and its conservation. Now the elements are well stated out. There are 6 of them. Compensation scheme. So when you declare a particular area protected, you may be robbing a particular community of the resource that they believe they have. So there must be compensation. Income generating project, that means you must give them another income generating project, because ordinarily they will go for hunting and they want to kill those even endangered species. Substitution. So, and we must also program, which we mentioned as part of this element on your left-hand side. Now, these are examples of community involvement programs, about 5 of them in the cross the Cross River National Park, the Game Harvest Park in Botswana, in Zambia, and Zimbabwe. These are different community involvement programs. As you can see in my my left hand, you see training, you can see another one, they are already in the wild, taking observation. These are just pictures of example of community-based program in wildlife management. I'd like to ask this question: why should local community participate in wildlife management? Why? I mentioned a few of them, but I like to think about it. The second question I'm asking, take a look at it by the time you go through this video again, and just reply based on your understanding. Okay. Now, we know that people don't just obey for obeying sake. Okay. The park must be protected and the law must be enforced. You see, this is a park guide, right at the road, monitoring from a distance. They have telescope, they have what they have to defend themselves. You can see these are also, guards. We'll look at their roles later after the slide. But their main function, is to produce sustained annual crop of wildlife animal for recreation. Number two, protect, regulate, and enforce the law. That is their, their primary role. And of course, we know that it's a very tedious role, and they are well educated and equipped to carry that role out. Now, what is the duty of these, law enforcement, agents? What is their duty? Their duty is very clear. Number one, we have the Chief Park Range, that's the Chief Park Warden. He has 7 duties. Let me just state them one after the other. They protect the area, they patrol the area to protect it from encroachments. They check for license and permit. Remember, we told you about, that there are some licensed hunter and there are rules that govern, their hunting. They also protect the park from illegal hunting, poaching, involved in conservation education, as we saw in that picture, and they prosecute, arrested offender in the law courts. They know that there are rules that empower them. The ranger, the accidental violator who has intention to violate, they made a mistake. They take note of that. Then the opportunistic violator who leaves home with no intention to violate the law, but the birds are so abundant in the adjacent close area, and they carry out and go after them. Okay, so the ranger are able to trace and track such people and bring correction to them. Now, who leave the home with lawful intent to violate the law, they are able to violate opportunists and criminal. So the ranger must be able to differentiate, all the category and respond to them accurately to enforce the law governing the wildlife. So at this point, I want to really appreciate you for taking to join this video. So watch it very well. Post a question for us. By 8 o'clock, you can start posting your responses. I will be available to also read through and make my own comments there. I wish you the best. I believe you're already doing your TMA. You're preparing for exam. Go through all of these lecture notes, listen to them over and over again, and master it. You could be, the next observation, and also be beneficial for all the 3 aspects. I wish to thank you for coming to the class. I will listen to this video.